Thank you. So I'm here to talk about living with autism as a part of our series on living with. And it's a question about whether I talk about living with autism or whether I talk about living with markers. I think if you ask a parent of an autistic child, you will all about what is it to live or to bring a child with ASD diagnosis, you will always hear a different story. There are no two the same children or adults with autism who would experience the same sort of symptoms, who would show sort of the same ways of sort of being, seeing the world, interacting. Their stories are very different, their lives are very different. So if I give you a story of living with autism, it's really more about living with Marcus, who has autism. It's almost like two sides of a coin. There is the life with autism that Marcus has, and there is life with Marcus. Marcus is not the autism, he has autism, but he is also Marcus. And it's quite important to see those two sides to it, because it's very easy sometimes just to see the autism and not to see the child or the adult behind it. When I was thinking about it and partly realising how different the stories are, I thought it would be really helpful to have Rachel Ruckley here and somehow share that talk, because she would give you a very different example of looking after a child who is almost 16 and who's got Asperger's syndrome, because autism is an umbrella for a very different it covers Asperger's syndrome, what we call also autism, but other pervasive developmental disorders. So you would get very different stories, but Rachel is away for this weekend, so I will share with you something about my experience of life with Marcus. I thought what may be helpful and what's kind of typical for the autistic spectrum disorder is that there is a triad of impairment, areas where the children or adults face significant difficulties in. And it's language and communication, it's social interaction, and it's what sometimes is called social integration, behavior or social imagination. So those three areas, and I'll kind of look at those areas and I'll sort of share something about how Marcus's life is affected and how our life is affected as well. I think one thing that I have noticed about autism is that it kind of creeps up on you. You know, when Marcus was born, it was like he was a perfect child. You kind of think you arrived safely to the point when you sort of know, you've got 10 fingers and 10 toes and you're quite happy. And it only slowly, after probably a year or so, you suddenly realize that things don't quite add up. And it's really strange how slowly it creeps up on you and then it's suddenly there and you're thinking, how does this happen? And in many ways it's kind of like sometimes almost like a silent disability, in a sense that the children, when you first see them, look perfectly normal, and it's only when you kind of get to know them you realize that there are differences. I love taking Marcus to Yellow Submarine or to any sort of soft play centres, because he absolutely loves it, but he's got a freedom which he hasn't got in many other places to just be, and in many respects he is just as any other child, running around, playing, and I love going there with him because mostly I just can't see a difference. There is Marcus sort of running around and enjoying himself, until he takes somebody else's chocolate cake or, grasps for somebody's phone. Or unless children come and try to speak to him and interact with him, and he just looks through them as if they were not there. And that's the kind of thing about autism. This aspect of it is kind of, you've got these glimpses of almost normality, and then suddenly it comes back at you and you see that things are not quite normal and that there are problems. So that was kind of our experience, that we have realized, it kind of crept up on us and we realized things were not quite as they should be. And one of the obvious things is with the language and communication. So, we realized that Marcus doesn't have the 10 words or 20 words that the children have when they are sort of a year or two. And even though he did attempt to sort of use some language early on, kind of later that kind of skill or ability disappeared, or maybe not disappeared, he just wasn't motivated to try and use words. So until about 10 months ago, Marcus was more or less non-verbal, and what is part of the life is autism for many parents. Because of the lack of language and communication, laminator becomes an important sort of friend and part of your life. So we would spend evenings laminating cards and pictures and symbols, just trying to create things, and visual sort of help that would enable Marcus to communicate with us, and that would enable us to get into Marcus's world, and Marcus somehow can sort of, enter into our world. Marcus is what's quite sort of probably not as typical as many children. He is very passive. It is sort of something that you can see in autistic children, but more or less you'd see children who get frustrated because they can't communicate and they have tantrums, they can't express themselves because they haven't got the language. Marcus is a child who was very passive, and he just wouldn't be motivated to communicate, to say what he wanted. He wasn't able to actually probably even understand what his needs were, so we are creating all these pictures, and he loved them, but he loved to play with them. He had not the inner motivation to actually give it back to us, and yet I knew that he actually knew words for quite sort of way back when we were sort of seeing speech and language therapists about it, and they said, oh no, pictures are no useful because he has no concepts of words. And I knew, because I knew that he could do sounds, animal sounds, and I knew that he could, match the sounds to the pictures, or that he could link pictures with the puppets of animals. But the other things about Marcus and many children with autism, they do things on their own terms, so that they show you that they can do something, or that they can communicate with you when they want to, but not necessarily when you want them to or when you need them to. And that makes kind of the day-to-day life sometimes very difficult, and it's very hard not to just step back and do everything for him, because it just is so much easier. So language and communication was quite a big issue for Marcus. But then, when it's, as it is in Marcus's case, sort of overcome, at least to some extent, it is really a joy. We never knew whether we would hear him talk, and whether you hear just, him sort of saying words like mummy or daddy. But then you do, and it's kind of more amazing than when your normal child, typically developing child, does that. Also, when he was starting his reception class, he was non-verbal, and at the end of his year at the school assembly, he was reading out whole sentence. And that just shows you how the kind of learning happens in a different way, because typically developing child takes it step by step and develop in certain direction. We knew Marcus could possibly read, before he could speak. So when it comes to him being able to actually form the sounds of the word. We knew he was able to read them, but he kind of shows, he shows you that he can do it by sort of making words out of letters, in the nursery, just out of the blue. And often parents would say they start to speak out of the blue. You don't hear a sound from the children, and then suddenly then come and tell you the whole sentence. It wasn't like that with Marcus. He just brought me a sort of lotto board and just really kind of spent about 2 minutes trying to get my attention when I was talking to my parents, and then just showed me a picture by picture and told me the different colours, on the lotto board, and just out of the blue suddenly named, all the colours. They sort of woke us up. Actually, his very first speech was in 3 o'clock in the morning, sitting on our bed, waking us up by singing us ABC song, And we knew he could sing, but we didn't quite know that he actually can form, all the letters, because until then he was just sort of singing the tunes to himself. So there are surprises that comes with in the way how sort of he overcomes some of the difficulties. But the language and communication difficulties, all the kind of triad of impairments, they overlap. So obviously the difficulties with ability to speak and the motivation to speak sort of somehow comes with the social interaction difficulties as well. Somehow for Marcus there is no concept, or maybe a little bit more now, but for ages there was no concept that actually he will get something by making contact with the other people. You could put a piece of chummy bread, which he used to love, in front of him, out of his reach. He would not even reach out, he would just look at it and not understand why we don't give it to him, That was when he was about 2. And that actually he could count, even some children would always lead others to places and show them somehow what they want, even if they can't speak. For Marcus, this took 4 years before he actually realized he can take us to a place, or that he can show us that he wants something, even if he wasn't able to speak. And I think that motivation, understanding that the other person is kind of an equal partner in the interaction, is something that Marcus is missing. So children with autism and Marcus, they are sort of often on the edge. They don't know how to get into. And Marcus would often appear that he doesn't want to, but you don't really know whether he does or doesn't he want to, and that comes to his passivity. And we had a battle in school to actually tell them, because when he was started in school only on 2 mornings, to actually explain to them that he does enjoy the company of other children, even though he doesn't appear to, that he actually benefits from it. And when you know him, you know that there is some sense of satisfaction and contentment that when he is in the group with other children and doing the same things. But because, the children have often a lot of anxiety and they would put themselves on the edge, the adults often think that they don't want to be included or that they don't need to be included. And the difficulties that are there around the social interaction often mean that those children are left out, or that there is no, you have to make an effort. They can't do it by themselves because of the lack of inner motivation and stimulation that it's there for typically developing children. They can't motivate themselves, so you have to include them in. But you also have to have the expectations that they can do things, because they are so often on the edge, because they so often don't get involved. You don't expect them that they could be able to do things with the other children, and you don't put that kind of, you need to put slightly higher expectation on them to be involved. And actually when you do, they get, and Marcus loves now being in school. He loves sitting with the other children in his group time and actually, taking part. But it is with an effort and one-to-one support for him to be able to do that. And the easiest way often would be to let them be on their own, or to let them do their own things, and or to keep them away from a typically developing children. One of the difficulties that Marcus had is he wasn't able to imitate, and lots of children learn by imitation. They learn to do things by imitation, they learn to observe the emotions in your face, they learn to get the clues from whether you're happy, whether you're angry, whether they've done something right or something wrong, and they just learn naturally. And that's one aspect that's missing for children with ASD. So with Marcus, he would have no clue if you just look at him and try to, with some gestures, to give him sort of an idea of what he should do. He wouldn't be able to imitate until very recently action songs. But that kind of very natural skill for other children means that he doesn't learn a lot of other things that the children learn. And on the level of kind of expressing their feelings and emotions is because, you learn to express by often reading the emotions in other people's faces, and you learn to express your own. And that's something that's very difficult. And often children get confused and anxious because of that lack within that area of the social interaction. We don't, perhaps, apart from Marcus not being able to interact with us on a day-to-day basis on the kind of level of his basic needs, that's probably where we have difficulties. But the kind of, that you're always looking into the future, and you're aware that this is going to change and maybe become even more a problem as he gets older. And I think that's something that for many adults with autism, this is a difficulty that always struggle with and always impacts on their lives. And the third area of the impairment is to do with behaviour, with the social integration, and sort of many other things that affect how they are. Often onto this part comes kind of rigid thoughts and being dependent on routines and kind of lack of flexibility. With Marcus, I probably say, looking at it from practical point of view, we've been lucky that he's very flexible, so I can go out with him, I can take him anywhere, and more or less don't get tantrums. That's probably due to his passivity and the fact that he doesn't necessarily express whether he is anxious or not in a big way as other children may. And I have no idea how much that kind of passivity and the lack of expression of his own sort of fears, how much it can be damaging to him, if I actually take him, because I just expect him to go wherever I lead. But on a practical basis, the way how we experience autism is that I can't take them to the park by myself, because Marcus is a child that has no sense of danger. If he's in the open space, he would run, and he wouldn't stop when you call him. He would, he hasn't got kind of awareness of sort of whether he's safe or not. So a little story, when I went to London to see my friends, they had a quite huge garden, and my friend said, I'm going to look after them for a minute, and she took them into the garden. Didn't realise there's a little pond right at the end. And of course Marcus ran. Lucy ran as well. Lucy stopped. Marcus didn't. He just walked straight into it. So it's the kind of like pond. There's lots of green stuff and very smelly. So, and it was just about 2 minutes when she took them on. And just Marcus's total lack of awareness that there is a danger, that you don't walk into the water, So I was in a situation where she was able to pick him up and drag him out of it very easily. But you constantly live with a fear that something could happen. And also he often responds by flopping. He's very passively non-cooperative in a very quiet, subtle way. So he doesn't throw big tantrum, but you walk with him and suddenly he flops and you've got Lucy and he wouldn't move. So in the middle of the town it's not very easy when you have to drag him on and on. In terms of flopping on the stairs, his big scar, he had a couple of plastic surgeries already, but his big scar is simply for the very first time he flopped in that way was when I was walking down on the stairs with him and Lucy in a way in the other hand, and he just flopped. And obviously when you're not prepared for it, I know it now, so my grip is much firmer. But before, I just lost him and he just went straight onto the bookshelf and, quite seriously sort of injured himself. And so there are those kind of day-to-day practicalities, the behavior related and to do with sensory issues. Marcus likes highs, so he would climb on things, on shelves, and he confined spaces, so you would often find him lying on the bookshelf somewhere high up or right on the top of the bookshelves. We have them all fixed to the walls, so we know he can't sort of flop over. But it is a decision between, do you follow him everywhere all the time 24/7, or do you actually let go and do you allow for the risk that he may fall? And it's a very hard one to manage, but most of the times when he fell and something happened was when I was, when I had to look after Lucy and do help Lucy with something, and Marcus climbing up. He's much better in that, and he's got good sense of balance. But the kind of stage when he got to where he is now was very frightening and worrying, and that of course means that you spend a good number of hours in a day. And you just have to watch out for him, and when you have to do extra things with him rather than concentrating on something else. And the impact it has on Lucy is that she hasn't got a sibling she can play with, and I haven't got two children. I can say, off you go and play together, because most of the time I have to be there sort of watching out. Another thing, and obviously this is something that it's difficult, but you're thinking how old he's going to be before, how long you can go on holding his hand when you are out with him. The other thing is, in terms of his behavior, it's his sleep. We had quite a long period of interrupted nights, and when he wakes up in the middle of the night, he's awake for 3 hours at least. And these days he doesn't wake up that much, but he comes into our bed instead, and he just lies across right on the top along the wall. And you take him back, and within minutes he's back again. And you take him back, and he's back again. Like a little puppy, always jumps up, and he's asleep, and jumps up on the bed, and then finds his way alongside the wall. And then Lucy comes in as well. So it's sort of difficulties that do affect you on a very basic level in terms of the interruption of sleep and in terms of the demand that you have to put in to actually keep Marcus safe. In terms of the energy to try to get him to talk to you and try to get into his life. And obviously a big area, and I won't go into great details into it, is about trying to actually other people to listen, that there are things you either need help with or that Marcus needs some support. For many parents, getting diagnosis is a long process, because first nobody takes you seriously that there is something different. And when they take you seriously, the waiting list for actually being seen and diagnosed is 12-18 months. So for a problem which is always told about that you need to have early intervention, and children often don't get seen until they are 3-4 years old, and sometimes later, you're missing on a valuable time where you can help them. But saying that, parents often don't get help. until they find the help themselves. Because even when children get diagnosed, the whole system is so under-resourced that there is effectively no help until they enter formal education. And to get the help when they're in a formal education, you have to fight very hard. And I share that with everybody, but Marcus has finished reception. We have started to ask for help when he was about a year before starting reception. And Marcus still didn't have his support in place now right at the end in a way that he should have had. So 2 years and we're still not quite there. Because even if you do get agreed and get some sort of support agreed to, it still doesn't necessarily mean in practice you are given it. So for parents it's ongoing struggle to just find ways how you can help your child. But in some ways it can appear like it's really difficult, it's hard, and it's a struggle. But as I said, Marcus, autism and Marcus can be separated. And for me, sometimes it's like there is a veil, because we have moments when you can actually get into his world and you see like you know the real Marcus there. And it's kind of like you get glimpses of him quite often, but you have to work hard to get them and to draw him in. And I often struggle. Some parents say, no, my child has autism, that's what my child is. And you have to accept it. And of course you have to accept that he has autism. But unlike some parents, I would never say I wouldn't change it, because I would. I do like Marcus with everything that comes with him. But I wish there was more of the real Marcus, if that makes sense. And you feel like there's the kind of veil of autism that sometimes is between you and him, and between him and the world. And I think the last things that I think I'd like to mention is about autism, and I'm sure it's true about many disabilities, is that you have the constant worry about what's the future gonna hold. And it's because you don't know how other people would handle it, how other people who, when he grows up, would be able to support him. When we talk with Guy about it, there is so much that's fascinating about Marcus and how he sees the world that sort of amazes you. That he's got gifts that you're kind of discovering, and he doesn't always let to see those gifts. I know, talking to Rachel, she says that Aaron is playing guitar in school for 10 years, but she's never ever had him play because he wouldn't share that with him. And there are so many aspects of their personality and their inner world that you're never gonna see and can't see. But there is something fascinating about the way how differently they approach things as well, and that they actually teach you a lot about how life is, and you don't take it for granted, and you do stop and sort of receive the life differently, maybe because of that. But I still would change it, if I could. But I think that's something that any other parent would say.